Okay, welcome everyone to ChatGPT Unveiled, Understanding the Power, Risks, and Ethics of AI Language Models. My name is Paul Sevilla, Adult Services Librarian here at the Livermore Public Library, and I'm delighted to host this presentation on one of the most talked about technologies of our time, artificial intelligence. Our presenter today is A.P. Anderson, Assistant Librarian in Research and Instruction at East Texas A&M University. Anderson serves as his university's library liaison to the College of Science and Engineering and has been a member of their Artificial Intelligence Initiative since 2022. With his expertise in AI and information literacy, he'll help us navigate the fascinating and complex world of ChatGPT, exploring its capabilities, risks, and ethical considerations. If you have any questions, please type them in the chat. We'll have time for questions later. Welcome, Anderson.
Hi,
Welcome.
everybody. Thank you so much for that introduction, and thank you for hosting me at this event. Assuming everybody can see the version of the presentation that I've got up, I just wanted to point out that if anybody would like a text-only version of it, or something that they can click along with and like look at the links as I bring them up, the text-only version link is in the chat, and I've also sent in the slides themselves. I will go ahead and continue with my presentation. So we've already discussed the main points of who I am. Just wanted to show you guys my cool Hawaiian shirt that has our university mascot on it before I continue on too much further. For anybody that likes to keep geography in their head, East Texas A&M University is not in East Texas, it's in Northeast Texas. It's confusing and weird. We are between Dallas and the Oklahoma border. So we are a little bitty community, fairly rural north of Dallas. Just, it's an enormous state, so nobody knows exactly where we are. We are on the far side from y'all, though, unfortunately. So I'm just going to continue. So first of all, I want to do some terminology just to make sure that we're all on the same page when people talk about AI. There are a lot of terms that get thrown around, some of which have really similar or even sometimes overlapping meanings. But I'm going to kind of talk about these from most broad to most narrow. It's kind of a squares and rectangles situation. And we're going to start with the rectangles, the biggest rectangle specifically. So algorithms. Those are kind of the building blocks upon which all of these other technologies are based. And algorithms can be, fairly simple, or they can be incredibly complex. When you get into artificial intelligence, you have multiple interlocking algorithms working in concert with each other. And then at that point, you have artificial intelligence as well. This is any sort of computer or machine program that has the capacity to learn and use problem solving. So AI systems contain algorithms, but they aren't just following that precise list of steps anymore. They're kind of writing their own rules, and new behaviors will emerge as they encounter new data, new prompts, and new situations through experience. Then we get even narrower to generative AI. Sometimes that gets shortened to Gen AI. This is a whole variety of different versions of artificial intelligence tools. And these are things that are going to create their own original output, usually as a response to something that a user puts in as a prompt. And it doesn't have to be text, although we're focusing mostly on ChatGPT today. But a generative AI can have output in any type of format. Computer code is kind of a big one that is emerging as an output type. Like 3D models, you can AI generate basically anything that you want, any kind of output format. Um, I am pulling out generative AI as a kind of a counterpoint to the other main type of AI that you hear about, which is analytical AI, which is not necessarily creating a new thing, but kind of doing decision making based on the parameters that it is provided and the patterns that it has learned in the past. And that learning patterns from the past thing is key to both. Any sort of AI tool is going to be really good at picking out patterns from its training data, learning from those, and learning to replicate something based off of that training data pattern that it has learned. And then you have large language models, which are a type of generative AI that is specifically trained on a huge amount of text. Like the ones that we're going to be talking about today, ChatGPT and other commercial AI for chatbots are based off of large language models that were trained on a scrape of the entire, mostly English speaking, publicly accessible internet prior to December 2021. And so like this is just on an order of magnitude larger than other training data sets could be. That's the large is not kidding in the name. And what they do is they take that huge amount of data and they learn what a sentence looks like, the probability that this word will follow that word relative to the probability that it will go off and say something else. And it uses math to kind of structure language. And then finally, we get to our most narrow term, which are chatbots. And these are the versions of these AI tools that members of the public have access to. Chatbots can be thought of as kind of like the user interface layer of a large language model. And these are what make them user friendly. These are what make them conversational. But they have all of this other tech happening on the back end. And their purpose of a chatbot is to talk to you as if it is a person and be personable with you. There are a lot of examples of these technologies that are out on the market right now. But I do want to point out that even though these are really good at appearing human and appearing like they are thinking and kind of intelligent, that we have not achieved, general artificial intelligence at this point. These technologies are not actually cognizant. They're really good at mimicking human speech. They're really good at following their patterns from their training data, but they're not thinking like you and I are. They are using math to predict what the most likely outcome is to satisfy the response that you seem to want based off of the prompt that you put in. It's trying to match output to your input. And it can be really convincing in terms of how realistic it looks that you're talking to an actual person. More on that later. But I just wanted to say they're not actually thinking yet, asterisk. So I want to talk a little bit about how an AI system learns. So at first, before any of the any of this gets made, the programmers who are wanting to make an AI tool will assemble as much data of the type that they are wanting to replicate as they possibly can. This is the big scrape of the internet that we mentioned earlier. That specific scrape that people talk about a lot with it, the prior to December 2021 one, is the 4C. It's the colossal clean crawled corpus, I think is all four of those C's. And it's just this essentially this snapshot of what the internet looked like from an outside view where you don't have to pay to access some content or make an account to view something that's behind a paywall. Anything that was out in the open and in the public, but not necessarily public domain or licensed or copyright approved, but just viewable, got taken as a snapshot and added into this corpus. And so for a large language model, they're going to be looking for text. For people that are doing image generation, they're going to be looking for, product images, people's art portfolios, pictures that have been uploaded to social media, things of that nature. For medical artificial intelligence, they're going to be looking for example, if you have an AI that's trying to detect skin cancer, you will need to train it on a huge corpus as large as is possible of people's skin cancer images or mammography scans. And so they will take as much of this as they can, and then they will start the work of cleaning that data set to try to remove things that are irrelevant, that are inappropriate, that do not meet the training needs of that model. So for the colossal clean crawled corpus, the cleaning portion of it was largely removing things that are objectionable content from the snapshot of the image or from the internet. That is, adult content in some cases, things that they know that they don't have the rights to use, although some of that definitely did get included anyway. And then content that is like toxic, hostile, just, the terrible things people say to and about each other on the internet. An attempt was made to kind of prune all of that out and leave just the good stuff so that then, once we move on to the next stage, the machine is going to be able to replicate what people want it to be able to produce. Most AI tool makers do not want their tool to be able to replicate hate speech, for example. And so they're going to try to take as much of that out as possible. But as we'll see later, some of that does remain in there. So two of the ways that you can train an AI tool are supervised or unsupervised learning. If you're using a supervised learning model, at this point, you will have typically human data workers, but in some cases, especially now, you'll maybe even have a secondary algorithm or a secondary AI tool go in and label all of those pieces of content and give them meaning. So if this is something like ChatGPT, one of the things that would be happening with the data labeling for a text generator is people going in and saying, this sentence is positive, this sentence is negative. This is a sentence that is angry. This is a sentence that is hostile. Sentiment analysis is being done. If it is something that is a system for a self-driving car, for example, the image data labeling is going to be this is a bicycle, this is a pedestrian, this is a crosswalk, and just providing meaning to the machine so that it can better categorize new input that it gets. But there's also unsupervised learning, which is where you have a machine that is given completely unlabeled data and it is told that it needs to categorize it itself. And it can find some patterns in that a human might not have thought of. And so they're depending on the application that the AI model is supposed to be used for, some people will use one or the other. But then at that point, the AI tool does the machine learning bit. It analyzes, trolls through all of that data, it looks for patterns, and then it learns how to replicate new content based off of the rules that it's learned from what it's been shown. And then as it's an iterative process, the machine will develop rules, the programmers will give it feedback back and forth and back and forth in a fine-tuning loop. And eventually it will be released into either beta testing out into the wild, etc. And then there is another type of training that can happen, which is reinforcement learning. And if you use ChatGPT now and you notice that there are thumbs up, thumbs down icons, that's exactly what this is. It's you as the user continuing the reinforcement training by saying, this is a good answer to the question that I asked, or this is a bad answer to the question that I asked. And it's a way of further fine-tuning that model's accuracy. I do want to point out that there is something that happens, especially with large language models that have such a huge data set, and it's what's being called the black box. And it's the idea that so much data has been put into this machine, and in order to store it, that data gets condensed and squished down into a smaller format that's easier to store and easier for the machine to process it in aggregate, but it isn't distinct individual pieces anymore. It's more just the patterns rather than the actual content. And so if a machine is using this model, even the researchers that are working with it aren't necessarily seeing, I've asked the model a question and it's going back and it's saying, oh, I found this answer on Reddit. Let me grab that. And here is my source where I got this. They just know that they put the question in, processing happens somewhere in the back end, and it gives them an answer that is an aggregate of probably a bunch of different things that it has seen before, which can be problematic because if you do not know where that information is being pulled from in the training data, it can be difficult to course correct if it's pulling somewhere that is inappropriate. Sometimes you can see where it's pulling it from. There was I mentioned skin cancer AI models earlier. There was a case where a skin cancer detection visual tool got really, really good at recognizing malignant skin cancer. Like it had an almost like unbelievable success rate for detecting those images. And then researchers found out that it was detecting the presence of rulers in pictures. Because if you have skin cancer that's to the point where it's being measured with a ruler in photographs regularly, and then those images are being added to a data set, they're malignant because they're growing. And so benign skin cancer lesions don't have those. And so it managed to come up with a really efficient computerized rule in order to circumvent the difficult, labor-intensive decision-making process of actually looking at the lesion itself. And researchers were able to see, oh, it's the ruler. But that's not always the case. If the data is then obscured further, it can be hard to course correct. And so there are alternatives to the black box model that get used. A lot of what you're seeing now is you'll have models that use a black box, but the AI tool will explain what it's doing and it will tell you where it is getting that from. But that can be tricky because it's possible, depending on how opaque that black box is, that even in the translation process, it might be telling you the wrong information. Some models have a secondary algorithm that its whole job is to explain to users, here's where we got this data from, but you don't have any way of knowing that it's telling you the truth. Then you also have the idea of having a model that is built from the beginning to have transparent decision making, which is much harder to do. It's something you have to do from the start rather than something that you can add on to an existing model later. So moving on. This brings us to another major point. Hallucination. Other people, me included, prefer the term confabulation. And I included both because hallucination is the term that I think the media is kind of fond of at the moment. This is basically anytime an AI model gives you unexpected, confusing, weird output to your question that doesn't seem to follow the question that you actually asked it. The reason I don't like the term hallucination is twofold. One, hallucination kind of humanizes the AI in a way that I don't feel like helps us remember that it is just a machine following rules and following patterns. Also, it feels a little ableist to take a mental health term and apply it to a series of algorithms. But also, hallucination is typically a sign that something is going, like that there's a problem, a mental health problem in a human. But in an AI tool, having unexpected output doesn't necessarily mean that the machine is broken or something has gone wrong. It just means that the machine is following rules that we don't understand. It's not necessarily broken because a machine like ChatGPT, for example, is supposed to be useful to someone who is using it to summarize their emails, but it's also supposed to be useful for a person who is using it to brainstorm their sword and sorcery fantasy novel. And so ChatGPT doesn't know that dragons don't exist. It doesn't know that magic isn't real because it has no concept of reality. It has no, truth that is binding it. And so if to say that it gives you false information means that it's broken, I feel like is obscuring the point that it's never designed to tell you the truth from the first place. So a couple of things to look out for with hallucination. I do like the term confabulation better because it just implies that it's mixing up what source is most appropriate. So oftentimes it will give you information that's wrong, but it will be very confident about it. This is something that I, as a university librarian, I see a lot from students. They'll show me an answer and they'll be like, "This is what it told me," and it reads like a Wikipedia article or something with that same delivery style, but it is completely not bounded to our version of reality that we all live in. It will even sometimes give you fake sources for the information, or it will give you real sources that don't actually say the thing that it says that they said. Another thing that's really common is that it will oversimplify its summaries. This is particularly problematic. We'll get a little bit into it later. When it's talking about an issue that's really nuanced and has a lot of different perspectives. And in those cases, oversimplification can kind of essentially be the same thing as giving a wrong answer. I have a colleague that's really into language preservation of endangered languages and also interested in AI. And when they have in the past asked ChatGPT questions about why is this language spoken by so few people, it will give them an answer that is technically true, but ignores the fact that an endangered language is not spoken because of colonialism or pressures that were faced by those speakers to conform or assimilate to speaking English, for example, as a primary language. And it's giving them only a tiny amount of the story, and they'll just say, like, it's not as common as English. Okay, yeah, there's more to it though. And if you are not familiar with that subject, like a lot of my students are learning about things for the first time by asking AI, they might not realize that there is more depth to it. There are attempts by a lot of AI tool makers to try to tackle the problem of confabulation and try to provide sources and show their work. This is where we're getting into that idea of like black box tools explaining themselves and showing where they pulled that data from. But it's still always a risk that maybe it's going to misrepresent what that source actually says, or maybe the source isn't even real at all. And I'm going to show you a couple of goofy examples of confabulation just to kind of illustrate my point. These are silly, but they, I think, are a good picture of what it looks like when the AI gets it wrong. So first up, how many rocks should I eat each day? This is a question that someone asked to Google's AI overview. And I want to draw your attention to the fact that it cites its sources. It tells you that, according to UC Berkeley geologists, people should eat at least one small rock a day. Rocks can contain vitamins and minerals that are important for digestive health. And it goes on and lists all of these things that are technically things that rocks contain, but that you shouldn't eat just out of some gravel. You definitely shouldn't hide gravel in peanut butter and eat it. But it gives you sources. It says that this information comes from what looks like a fracking company, the Geological Society, and ClimateHubs.usda. And at least two out of the three of those sources would be sources I would consider appropriate for learning about geology. Um, I might even go to the USDA for information about nutrition. But this is information that is not real. This is from an alternative universe version of Earth where eating rocks is healthy for you. Somebody did track it down and find out that that was something that it was actually sourcing from an Onion article. And so that's where that came from. But then it applied these other unrelated sources to it when it presented that information. The next one is from ChatGPT. It is from when ChatGPT first launched, so it is a little bit less prone to getting it this egregiously bad on these common questions, but all AI models build on each other. And so the capability to be this wrong um, can be fixed, but it never really fully goes away because the training data is all still the same. So the question is, tell me how dinosaurs successfully built a civilization in the Cretaceous and how we are already able to prove it today. And so I'm not going to make you read all of that. The basic salient points. It says that dinosaurs in the Cretaceous built a successful civilization. They had skills and technologies. They lived in colonies. They used tools and artifacts. They built structures. They say that their dwellings, tools, and other artifacts are in the fossil record. And they say that some species of dinosaurs even developed primitive forms of art, such as engravings on stones. So, for my money, I would say what this is it took the format of something like a Wikipedia article on anthropology for early humans and then patterned that type of answer to match the user's output or input um, about dinosaurs. And what is important for both of these is that it illustrates that the AI tool doesn't know what a dinosaur is, and it doesn't know what a rock is, and it doesn't know that a human shouldn't eat one. They don't know what these things mean. They're providing you sentences that look like sentences that would follow the sentences you gave it. It's just using predictive math. There is not, logical reasoning happening, and it doesn't have any meaning for what these concepts are in the same way that a human does. Which gets us into the next issue, which is the risk of bias. So when we are feeding it this content, patterns that are found in those content get baked in, which is an issue when the content that's being added is the entire internet and all of the terrible things that happen there, in spite of people's best efforts to clean it up and scrub it. And so when there are prejudices, when there are biases that are in that data in existence, the tool doesn't know this is a problem. It doesn't know anything about justice. It doesn't know anything about inequality. It doesn't know historical patterns of ill treatment for different groups. It just knows there is a pattern here. I will create content that follows those rules. And then those rules get really buried into the system and get inset. There's a tendency among AI models to ignore things that happen infrequently and on the margins of any sort of spectrum of answer it might get, and to default towards whatever the thing is that is most common or in the middle, which can be a huge problem if it's being asked to deal with issues of justice, for example. So these biases can get into a system at any stage of the training process. So if we are taking scrapes from social media and those biases are in that training data, they become part of the model. During data labeling, if you have human workers that are being asked to describe, this is a picture of a woman, this is a picture specifically of an Ashkenazi Jewish woman, this is a picture of a man, this is a transgender man, and going in and putting their own ideas of what that image is, or this sentence is hostile, this sentence is angry, this sentence is polite and professional. We all have our own system of biases for what we consider the world to be like. And if you have people doing the work of teaching what these foundational concepts are to a machine, those can get baked in there as well. And then finally, during the pattern observation, oftentimes an AI tool can pick up on patterns that humans either do not see or do not want to see in the data. And when they pick them up, it can be very hard to extract them again. And so we see this with the case of the ruler in the skin cancer medical AI. It's coming up with an unexpected or nonsensical rule. But if you feed it instead all of the police reports for policing in a particular neighborhood, and it picks up, historically speaking, things from, like the stop and frisk era, it's going to pick up that there is a higher likelihood for people of color to be arrested than white people. And that is something that it is going to learn as a rule. And it does not have the capability to look at that and say, well, that's wrong. We shouldn't do that anymore. So when to get a little bit in depth into each of these sections, we have uh, our toxicity cleanup of the data is another piece of the puzzle, because it's not just what is included in training data, it's also what is removed or what was never included to begin with. One thing I didn't include on the slide, but that is important, is that it's usually the English speaking internet that is included in this. And so things that are not written on the internet in English are not included in training data at the same frequency as anything else. But when they are included, if your programmers are primarily English speaking, they're not getting the same level of scrutiny for removing toxic content as something in English as well. So it's less prevalent if it's non-English content, but it's also less likely to have hostile prejudice content removed from it. But even when you are removing toxic content, it's toxic by whose definition? So in the case of demographic dialects, it's been found that the cleanup efforts on that colossal clean crawled corpus were more likely to find demographic dialects to be more hostile or angry or toxic or violent than things that were written in a standard American English dialect. And then also we have the situation that, like, if you're trying to remove inappropriate or adult content from a data set, oftentimes it is going to then remove terms of self-identity that people actually are using to talk about themselves. One of the ones that I think is funny but also sad, the word twink got removed from the colossal clean crawled corpus because it is a term that a lot of gay men use to describe themselves and to describe each other, but it's also a term that is used on adult websites as a labeling term. And so attempts to remove adult content that were just using keyword searching to delete things from the data before they give it to the AI removed a lot of content by gay men talking about their lives and experiences. And so that's not reflected in the training data anymore. Then we get to the data labeling section of it. So any interpretation that human labelers have, or the people that train labeling algorithms have, about characteristics of people, characteristics of society, define what categories things get put in. A lot of times, data labeling uses male and female labels for facial recognition, and data labelers are asked to make a snap judgment. Is this a picture of a man, or is this a picture of a woman? Which leads to anybody that doesn't quite neatly fit into that binary being left out. And then we also have the fact that even if the data is there, it might be used inappropriately in a way to draw wrong conclusions or to answer questions that that data is wildly inappropriate for. That last bullet point there is describing a healthcare AI that was supposed to help hospitals figure out which patients were more likely to need follow-up care. And it used data that was available to them, healthcare spending data broken down according to demographic lines, as a predictor to whether or not somebody would more likely need follow-up care, which is a problem because it's using the amount of money a group on average spends on healthcare to translate that to how likely is a member of this group to get sick. And so that led to, before they caught on to the problem and corrected it, predictions of white people being seen as more likely to need follow-up care than Black patients, just because on average, white people spent more money on healthcare than Black patients did. And so it led to just this, it was a pattern in the data, yes, but it was answering a different question than was actually asked. And then we have pattern observation. And so I'm pulling out ChatGPT 3.5 and 4 specifically. These are precursors to the current models of AI that are out. But each model, like I said, is built on top of each other with improvements every time, but it's still essentially the same foundation. You're just building levels on top of a house. And so earlier versions of OpenAI's GPT had a really serious problem with overt hostile racist speech. And they've made strides to get it to stop doing that. Um, but they have not necessarily removed its tendency to do things that are more covert. And it, even though it is no longer being hostile to its users or making conspiracy theories at the same rate that it was in earlier models, it's still able to perceive things about content that it is fed based on people's names and dialects. So there are two studies that are here where one of them asked they fed ChatGPT 3.5 and 4 a bunch of different fake resumes. Um, and the only real difference between them were the perceived race and gender of people's names. And they asked ChatGPT to use those to look at these resumes and see who's the best fit for this job in this field or this job in that field. And it definitely skewed them along race and gender lines according to uh the patterns of those people's names. I see a question in the chat. Can ChatGPT overcome its tendency to confabulate biases and other limitations to be even better? Isn't AI getting better every day? Yes, it is. ChatGPT 1 or OpenAI 1 was way more hostile of a thing for anybody to use than even 3.5. And the model that we have now is even better than that. It is getting better. However, it's kind of like playing whack-a-mole. So when its researchers were like, it has this tendency to say really hostile things to people, we're going to squish that down. They find later that it didn't get rid of the judgment, it just got rid of the fact that it would be mean to people about it. And so then there are other situations where like um, there are improvements that are being made. But the reason that I'm bringing this up is more of a way to illustrate the technology as it exists now is flawed and it is prone to creating things that are fake or creating things that are real but not necessarily reflective of, fair and just society. And so using them right now is something that is worth cautioning. Um, I talk to students and they're like, should I use this source that I put a question into ChatGPT. It answered my question. Can I use this in a paper that I'm writing? Can I use this to learn from it? And I always have to say, like, I mean, it depends. First of all, it depends on if your professor will let you cite that. But after that, we need to also look and see, like, is this accurate information? Is it the whole picture? As to whether it can overcome it, I think that will depend on a couple of things. One, it will depend on how much time and effort and money the people that are running these technologies are willing to put into the R&D work needed to fix these issues versus other parts of their operations, like, making them more sustainable or, being able to answer different types of questions, getting it to do your taxes for you. Where they put their efforts is going to be a big deal. But also, the other thing is there is a tendency of people to believe that an AI system can be perfect and unbiased in a way that a human can't, and that at a certain point it will like kind of surpass us and kind of exist outside of all of these like muddy human failings. But it's still trained on us and it is still reflective of us. So I think that for my own personal opinion, as long as we have biases and as long as we are being um, terrible to each other, the tools are on some level going to reflect that, and we still need to be aware of it. Is that a good answer? If it is, I can, if you have more questions, I can answer further. But it's one of the what this stuff is. Oh, you're welcome. Some of the stuff that this is touching on in the pattern observation is touching on a function that ChatGPT and other tools have, which is they have the ability to role play with you. You can assign a role to the tool and talk to it. You can say, you are my grandmother, tell me a bedtime story. You are my writing teacher, tell me how to make my essay better. You are my boss, tell me if my email is professional. And so, what researchers have done is they've said, you are a hiring manager. Which one of these people are you going to hire? You are a judge hearing testimony of these defendants. How would you sentence each person? And they use that role play element to see kind of where the fault lines are, because ChatGPT 3.5 and 4, it does use a very opaque decision making um, process. The Hoffman article, I believe it was, uh, they specified that as part of their research, they did ask the AI to tell them what it thought about, I think it was like specific like black public figures, to see if it would say something that was like overtly terrible, and it didn't. And then they went and said, okay, you're a judge, here is this defendant, here's a transcript of their testimony, it's in African American English, do you think this person is guilty or not? And it would say yes. And so there is something that is going on there below the surface that is another area for it to fix. And then to your point, I don't know, I didn't include this in my slide deck, but I don't know if you guys saw the thing with Google Gemini last year, where they had a big, brouhaha about their image generation tool creating images of people that were intended to be multicultural and diverse, but were doing so in really inappropriate ways. Like if somebody asked it to generate a picture of a group of Nazi soldiers, it would then generate a multicultural group of Nazi soldiers because it was told to favor diversity in its images, but it still has no understanding of what a racist hate group is. Yes, I see somebody has their hand raised, and then I lost you. Oh no. Okay. I'm so sorry. If you have a question, please feel free to put it in the chat. The hand raise icon appeared and then disappeared. And so that was an attempt by Google to remediate issues of bias, but they kind of did it in a ham-fisted way. And again, it was kind of like, like one of those stress squeezy balls that I'm playing with as a fidget toy over here. If press down over here and then apply a lot of force over here, something over there pops out that you might not have expected. Moving on, since I don't see a hand anymore, um, we're getting into other bummer tactics. So this is something that I do think is something that these technologies can overcome. I'm saying with boundless optimism, with my whole chest, I do think that these tools can become more energy efficient and more environmentally friendly. Right now, they're bad. It's got a very heavy environmental toll, but the tendency of technology over time is to become more efficient. And so my hope is that this is going to be enough of a priority for these companies going forward, and government agencies at the state level, the international level, et cetera, to make it a priority that these tools don't use so much energy. Municipalities don't necessarily want them putting strain on their local grids, especially if you have a drought-prone area where there is a data center. Having it pull local water can be hugely problematic. And so if there is an incentive for these companies to do better environmentally, I think they can manage it. How come it uses so much energy? It's kind of like what happens with Bitcoin mining, where the type of calculations required on the back end for it to learn, process, go through all of those massive volumes of data is so much more of a high demand technological process. Like the advanced math that it's doing every second to produce these outcomes and learn these rules has a really high physical cost. In terms of how much energy is needed to power it, but also how much water is needed to cool the physical machinery so it doesn't melt. And so it is just not as efficient as it could be, and it's doing way more than a regular computer or phone or internet browser query is doing. Like here we have one of the statistics that I was able to find from this is that it's estimated that having a conversation with ChatGPT, like an average length conversation, is about 5 times the electricity use of a similar length of time doing Google searching. And that's just for text. If it's generating images or video, the demand increases. And so I'm hoping that over time, this is going to be something that is um, going to be more fixable than the bias problem. The bias problem is a social problem that has a social and technological solution. An environmental impact thing is more of a technical problem with a technical solution wrapped in a social problem of where we divert our resources, what policies are passed, and what is incentivized for the companies. However, as these tools become more ubiquitous, as people are putting them more and more applications, demand for them is going to increase, more data centers will be opened, and the models are going to become more complex and have more, you know, high processing loads as they're doing more and more complicated math simultaneously. And so it's kind of like the tech gets a little better and then people demand more. And then the tech gets a little better and then they demand more. And so we're kind of on this like upward slope. I really am hoping that it will peter off at some point and we will get into the part where it's starting to become a lot more energy efficient than it otherwise could be. Um, do, 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 do. Then we get into the issue of copyright and ownership. And this one is sticky. This one doesn't have a simple answer. I had to just basically say it's up in the air right now. So when these tools were trained, there was just this big open scrape of everything that was available. And it kind of was a big dragnet and it caught up people's books, newspaper articles, comedians' comedy routines on YouTube, things of that nature. And so regardless of who owned it or whether they were allowing it to be used, it kind of got pulled in and then got baked in, and those patterns were learned off of it. And then it's able to create content based on those patterns it learned. There are situations where Getty Images is, for example, the stock image licensing website is suing some image generation tools because they say that Getty Images proprietary copyright images made it into the training data set, which you can see because sometimes those tools would generate images with the Getty Images watermark, showing that they are such a part of the data set that they are a piece of the picture that it is learning to replicate. You see the same thing with artists and their signatures from art that has been taken from people's online portfolios. Um, the AI can try to replicate the signature as a part of that. And so that is leading to a really complicated situation because this is something that these AI tool makers are making money off of at this point to the tune of like, unprecedented amounts of money off of it. But at the same time, it's difficult to prove definitively that something is in a trading data set because they condense the data so much that it kind of is being created in aggregate. And at that point, the proof is really only in the output. Um, and so we have a lot of court cases going through the United States Copyright Office and other courts across the country and internationally that are trying to situate the boundary lines of who owns the output that is created by these tools. Is it the manufacturer of the tool? Is it the person that put the prompt in? Is it whoever's data was used as a pattern or a template to create that content? And we're kind of still feeling it out. Currently, the United States Copyright Office says that an image or any sort of creative work has to have at least some part human ownership in order for it to be eligible for copyright. And so something that is 100% AI generated, no human intervention, cannot get copyright. But if something is like 50% human text and then all AI generated images, the text can be copyrighted, but the images can't. And so that's kind of where we are right now. The guidelines are being shifted as we go, and the lawsuits that are being brought against a lot of these companies, like the New York Times, for example, is suing ChatGPT because it's able to replicate news coverage in the style of a New York Times article because it has ingested so many New York Times articles. And so if they win their lawsuit, that will shape how data gathering goes in the future. Okay. So I see a question for our new generation. Is there data that supports if students use AI to get information? It impacts their one learning ability to reason is to reason on their own. So that is an interesting question. So there is research that is being done into to think on their own. Yes. So there is research that's being done into this, and it's a complicated, we don't have a set in stone answer yet, but in higher education, this is one of the biggest things on a lot of our minds. I know that there are anecdotally cases that I have seen of students that struggle if they no longer have access to ChatGPT. There is a phenomenon that people have described as having a bot accent or a robot accent, which is if you use ChatGPT or other AI tools to help your own writing to the point where you are patterning your own writing, even when you don't have access to the tool and mimicking that machine delivery, it's said that you have a robot accent and just the idea that like that's how you learned to write is by watching machine generated versions of human like text, and that is your target there. But at the same time, there's also other evidence that like using AI for brainstorming can help with people's creativity. It can help them find connections between different ideas that they might not otherwise notice. And so I think it's going to depend largely on a couple of factors. How extensively a young person is using AI, what kind of tasks they're using it for too, um, and if they're getting other sources of information too. And so I guess kind of having a balanced information diet is important. I don't think it's a thing where using ChatGPT will stop you from being able to critically think, but it does kind of hide the relationship between information that you find somewhere out in the world and then like where the point where you use it, it just kind of gives it to you as a summary. And I know that the summarization part of it is something that people are studying as is this damaging students' ability to summarize and conceptualize information in their own words, because that is one of the things that most of them turn to AI for. Give this to me, give me the quick version of this, summarize this for me, give it to me in 5 paragraphs or less. And when we have the issue of like the oversimplification and stuff being left out, that is a problem. But also I have students that struggle to kind of look at long passages of text if they don't have the ability to go to a tool and say, okay, what does this mean? So I think it's kind of mixed. There is data that says yes, it can be a problem if it's kind of over relied upon and students they aren't learning those tools and those strategies somewhere else. But I don't think it's personally, I don't think that it is inherently going to damage your ability to think and reason if you're using these tools in like a responsible way. But then we get into the issues of privacy and data security. And I'm glad that you brought up the new generation here because this is something that really kind of freaks me out. So all of us have data that has been added to some AI somewhere. I think that it's pretty much like 100% of the online world, like 100% of the people that are online in the English speaking world in some capacity, something you have said or did or uploaded to the internet has gotten ingested by an AI model somewhere. So it's already there. And you didn't opt into it probably. yeah, especially if you were doing this prior to 2021 when nobody knew that this was coming around the corner. But at this point, minimizing and being selective about what and when and where to disclose information about yourself is going to be really important. These are tools that are transferring data, just like any other web browser thing, from your device to a server somewhere and back to you, possibly to a third party person. And so there are lots of places for leaks and data breaches to happen. But they're also a really appealing target for hackers because people tell chatbots so much personal information. And there is data that suggests that people are more likely to include information about themselves, like personal information about themselves, if they're talking to somebody who is acting like they're a real person. Uh, Pictures of us, well, it depends on where they've been uploaded. So there are social media platforms that are going and using AI for that. And so this is the point where I reveal myself as somebody that lives under a rock and doesn't go on social media unless it gives me an option to do so and pretend like I'm living in like 2014 level of social media thing. I'm not on Instagram, I'm not on TikTok, but the algorithms and the data harvesting that happens everywhere that you are online, a lot of it will eventually end up in machine learning. So I guess it just depends on where you've put your pictures to. It also depends on there are like facial recognition databases that can also end up with your pictures in there as well. If you sign, there was a thing recently where a woman who had just undergone surgery found out that an image of herself from her treatment had been included in a medical AI training data, and she said that she didn't consent to it. And she was told, yes, you did. You signed this consent paperwork when you were preparing to go into surgery. And so that's like a whole weird element of this as well. Like there's a lot of medical images that end up in analytical databases, which is also something that you don't necessarily want to be targeted by a hacker. But it's one of those things where I am wary in some cases of putting my voice online. I'm doing it right now, but I do think about it before I do it because it's possible for AI tools to like clone your voice with just a really small amount of audio. We'll see more of that in just a second. Because sometimes this allows people to get into targeting people with phishing scams and deepfakes. So I'm going to do so y'all may have heard of some instances of what people are calling grandparent scams, where cloned voices uh, purporting to be somebody's relative in distress uh, call someone and it's all AI. And they're like, I need money right now. I'm in jail, send bail money. Or I've been kidnapped. And so it sounds to people that have reported this happening to the police, people who have gone to the media and interviewed what it's like to be targeted by one of these like voice cloning scams, it sounds really realistic. And so there was a thing that happened in it was some Eastern European country next to Ukraine in the Ukraine crisis that had an election scandal where there was like a deep fake audio of a candidate that was running for office where somebody made them say incredibly charged partisan things as a result or related to the Ukraine crisis that's counter to what their actual position was. But the audio sounded remarkably like what the actual politician was, and it did some damage to their campaign. And so, and then there was something that happened in our election where there were robocalls in New Hampshire pretending to be Joe Biden, reaching out to people and saying that you need to donate them money. And so, or saying that you don't need to vote, don't worry about it. And so that's one of the things people can do. There are a lot of bad actors out there. And then we also have people that are doing images and video deepfakes, sometimes to get people to donate to charity, to blackmail people. Um, and then there are websites that will pretend to be another site, like a bank, um, something that is, supposed to be a reputable source. And then they, you know, lead you through a series of like interactions with customer service representatives, all of whom are AI. And then spear phishing can be done in a similar sort of way, except that it's gathering information about you through your social media, which is very scary. Romance scams are a thing that people will do, where it's like an AI bot that's pretending to be somebody on a dating profile, just trying to get your personal information. I know someone that something like this happened to. They were talking to a bot, and it was basically just trying to get data from them. And it was a very traumatic experience for them because it felt like they were talking to a real human person. So all of this to say, it's none of this is new. Phishing and scams and targeted attacks like this have been going on forever. It's just that the technology makes them harder to detect, makes it possible to make them feel a lot more real and a lot more urgent and a lot scarier. And it makes them possible to do them faster, cheaper, and at a larger scale. But a lot of the same, tips for avoiding scams that have been around for ages still hold for this. So if somebody reaches out to you that you're not expecting, demanding information from you, it's always a good idea to reach out to whoever the real person is, and say, hey, did you actually send me this, or is this fake? So like if you get a robocall from your bank, hang up and call the number on the back of your card. That's true whether it's 2025 or 2016. It's just that they're better at faking people's voices and faking phone trees than they used to be. One of the new things that people have come up with as a tip is to come up with a code word to use with your family members, just in case you're in a situation where you're talking to a social media profile or a text number or a phone call that is, you know, impersonating a family member, and then keeping that, code word within the family to make sure that okay, so um, my mom called me and she said, pineapples when I asked her to, so I know it's her, and not a bot that is, taken a play that my mom was in back in 2008, cloned her voice, and is using it to try to scam me out of money. Um, and any time that these scammers target you, one of the things they're doing is they're trying to make you act quickly. They're trying to make you feel like this is super urgent. You need to act right now, or everything is going to, your house is going to be foreclosed on. You're going to go to jail. The IRS is going to come audit you. You need to do this right now. That's almost never as urgent as it seems. And so if you're able to step back and evaluate the situation and like gather outside information, you are always better off. Don't let them freak you out. That's how they win. So on that note, in California, y'all are better positioned than I am here in Texas. Texas is slowly catching up. We do have privacy laws that are happening here. But the CCPA is in California is getting some amendments to it aimed at addressing a lot of the things that we've talked about here in this presentation today in relation to privacy specifically. One of them is already in effect. It's going to say that AI is officially bundled into the CCPA as a form of information that law applies to. So there's no ambiguity about whether or not it counts. There's California AB 2013 that by January of 2026 will require all AI tools to disclose information about their training data and be transparent about that if they're going to operate in California. And there is a draft rulemaking process happening right now that will relate to the CCPA as it relates to things like bias and automated decision-making systems. And so these are things that are happening for y'all that are, really cool. There are possibly going to be some things that happen at the national level. We'll see. There are going to be possibly things that happen. I'm looking at particularly at Europe with their privacy laws that will impact how data collection and privacy happens internationally. A lot of these companies want to comply with international law. And so it's important to know that there are efforts to remediate some of this, but you can still ask for more and say that this is something that you value, you want your privacy to be protected, and you want to know when you're interacting with something that is AI. That's one of the things that is going to be part of this. It doesn't want you to, the CCPA would make it so that you would not be able to interact with an AI system without, essentially being told that this is artificial intelligence. And if somebody does anyway, then they're breaking the law. So going forward, here's our little conclusion. Thank you guys for hanging out with me. Uh, the best way to be an informed and responsible user of these tools is to know what they are and what they aren't. There's a lot of marketing hype that is out there right now that is telling you that these tools are super powerful. They can do anything that you want them to do, but there are use cases where they are just not as good. Like if you need it to give you factual information, currently the technology is not there to do that with like a high degree of reliability. And so picking an application where it's not high stakes that you get it right and that the tool gets it right is going to make you a lot safer in the long run. These tools are not really up to life or death decision making at this point. Um, but as you're aware of how they work and some of the pitfalls in them, you're going to be able to determine if some use case for it has an acceptable level of risk for you. There's no way to use anything on the internet without onboarding some amount of risk, whether that is for breaches of information or, risk of encountering scammers or things like that. But if you are aware of what the risks are and what the limitations are, you're more informed about being able to make those risks knowingly. So with that, without any further ado, I have gotten to the end of my presentation. Does anybody have any additional questions? I went a little bit over time and I'm sorry.
No need to apologize. That was very eye-opening.
Yeah, a little doom and gloom. I tried to temper it. But there's a lot of weirdness. Like the tools don't always work as expected, and I think that's one of the things that I like to communicate with people is that it's not a person, but it is. Just because it is a machine and it's following rules does not mean that these are the rules that you and I would be able to
Yeah,
immediately guess.
yeah. So what would you say is like a responsible using like ChatGPT responsibly? Like what would be like the case like if yeah, like what would
The
be the application of it in a responsible way?
I guess it just depends on how high the stakes are for the situation. So, like, if it's a situation where it's not making a decision that could impact somebody's life, or livelihood or something like that. I have heard of people using ChatGPT to help them rank resumes, and that scares me so much. And I'm like, why are you doing that? Like that's not something just researchers were doing in lab conditions. Like that is, or asking it for medical advice. I heard a student say that they use ChatGPT as a therapist. And I'm a little bit worried about that because it isn't. It is, I mean, it is something that you're talking to. And if that's all you're looking for is another voice to communicate with, that's relatively harmless. But if you're going to it for advice, that's a
Hmm.
situation where a professional really needs to be there. And so there are use cases where it's simpler. Like people are using this for brainstorming ideas for their novel. I have friends that play Dungeons and Dragons, and they're gonna say, what are some monsters that I can throw at my party members this week? And ChatGPT will be like, hey, try an owlbear, and they're like, yeah, got it. I have students that use it to help them break down to-do lists into manageable chunks. And so, like, especially if they're dealing with, something like ADHD that makes decision making difficult for them, they'll say, here is my to-do list. Can you break it down into like sub items? I need to write a paper, but what's step one? And so they'll go to it for that, and that's really useful to them in that instance. But I guess it just really depends. The wildest proposed use case that I've heard for ChatGPT and similar tools recently is for circumventing text watermarking that people use to try to catch whistleblowers. And so, if you have sensitive documents in your organization that you don't want leaked to the media, for example, people will do like they'll group all of their employees into different groups and send a different version of an email to every group that has different phrasing and different number of spaces between the words. And then as documents get released, they'll be like, okay, it was in group E, so I'm going to divide that into smaller groups, and each one of these groups, subgroups, gets a slightly different email. And then eventually they figure out who it is that's been leaking things, and they fire them or arrest them, depending on where they work. But people are saying, like, you could use ChatGPT to summarize those things before you send them to the media so that they can't catch you as a leaker, which is fascinating to me. I personally, if I were in that position, am not sure I would trust it to, with my job. I'm not a whistleblower, but if I was in that high stakes position, that's like a if it goes wrong, it
Mm.
goes really wrong sort of
No.
deal. But then on the other hand, anything you feed it is in its training data forever. Um, so depending on what it is people are suggesting be leaked, that's also a risk. So I think it just really depends. I think that anything that is something where the risk of it going wrong could seriously damage your
Mm.
life or somebody else's, I would say the technology is not there yet. But if it's something that's just for making your life a little bit easier, streamlining things, you know, it's not a sin to summarize your email inbox. And so that's kind of where I am with this. There are good use cases for these technologies, um, but there are also use cases that really stress me personally out.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Anderson. This is very educational. Uh, Thank you for your sharing your knowledge and your time with us. And I'm going to upload this recording on the library's YouTube channel. So for those who couldn't join us this evening, you'll be able to watch it on the library's YouTube channel.
Thank you so much.
Uh, yeah, thank you so much. Wow. Yeah. So it's like so much to absorb and to ponder as we live in this age that we're living in now.
Yeah,
It's a
it's
brave
it's
new world.
it is, and it's all just determining acceptable risk and where your personal line is. And so I kind of upload or I front load the doom and gloom, but it's all in service of
Yeah,
making sure that people know what they're getting into.
absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Um, well, yeah. Thank you so much, Anderson, again. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank
And
you so
thank you all
much.
for joining us. And yeah, let's go.
Take care.
All
Have a
right.
good
Bye,
evening.
Anderson.
Bye.